Okay, economics, that's a kettle of fish, isn't it? When you think about it, people ask you, what does economics mean? What is economics, if you will? So economics, however you want to call it. To put it into most succinct terms, economics is the study of scarcity. And I have a note on here, think price. And the reality is it's not just price, it's anything where there's scarcity is present, where there are limits, and limits surround us, right? We have limited resources. Again, using Mick Jagger, who's going on 80 at this point, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you get what you need. That points back to Mick Jagger and his days at the London School of Economics. So there you go. It's all around us. Economics. Just like finance, whatever you want to call it. Economics certainly is then that study of scarcity. When you think of scarcity, I have a note on here again about price, and it's not just about price. It doesn't necessarily have to have a price tag affixed to it to be scarce. We have a 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, X number of minutes in an hour, and so on and so forth. We have limitations on virtually everything we do. We have unlimited wants. We want everything. We want all that there is of everything. Like the J.G. Wentworth commercial. I want my cash and I want it now. We want. The reality is that we can't have everything that we want, and thank goodness for that, I suppose. But anyhow, another quick point, just to throw a name out here, John Neville Keynes. This has to do with the idea of positive economics versus normative economics. John Neville Keynes was the father of John Maynard Keynes, who also studied under Alfred Marshall. Well, actually, it was Neville Keynes. John Neville Keynes was a colleague of Alfred Marshall, and John Maynard Keynes was a student of Alfred Marshall. I believe it was at Cambridge, but if I get it wrong, oh well. Cambridge or Oxford, probably Cambridge. At any rate, again, this is just one of those things in economics you run into where there's a definition associated with it, and positive economics is the study of what is in economics, the reality that we're facing, versus the normative side, where what it ought to be. It ought to be fairer, things like that, or it ought to be more equitable, or it ought to be, this is how society ought to look, ought to be, as opposed to the positive, and that is what the reality is that we are facing. Okay, so again, building up from that, the brass tacks, if you will, of economics as a study of scarcity. So typically people look at economics or economics as, I'll try to refrain from repeating that, economics and economics going forward, but the idea again is that people have a tendency to look at economics as more of a business in a business environment, but that is not true. That is not the case. That's part of it. It definitely has something to do with money and so on and so forth. But again, try to stick with that idea of economics in terms of scarcity, because scarcity is all around us. It's not just within the business environment. So starting from that point, from that idea of scarcity, now we're going to be looking at, this is something that is very simple, very straightforward, yet it's very difficult to kind of get your head wrapped around, and that is the circular flow of economic activity. This is at the basis of all economics, if you will. In fact, this is from whence all of the various strains of economics are derived. Whether we're talking about microeconomics or macroeconomics, or drilling down into those various aspects as well, to such things as labor economics, resource economics. Anyhow, this is kind of the root of economics. These are the guideposts, if you will, that are out there. So again, when we're talking about economics, this is the way it's set up, and you can see it in various formats, but we're really looking at four sectors of the economy. One being the household. In this case, it's on the left. It's the circular flow. And on the right is the firm. In addition to the firm or the firms, and household, there's also the government sector and the international sector. So those are the four sectors: the households, the firms, government, and the international. Those are the four sectors that kind of rapture arms around this thing that we call the circular flow of economic activity. Okay, anyway, so starting from the household, we're looking at the productive resources. The productive resources include labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and land. So what that means is that labor is pretty straightforward. That's us, our work that we're from which we receive, or for which we receive what? We receive salaries, some other types of income, wages, etc. And this is the labor portion of it. You could be receiving profit sharing. Okay, there's that part of it too. So it's not just wages and salaries. It could also be some degree of profit. So what you would be receiving for the use of your labor. Capital. Yeah, we'll go ahead and do capital. Capital is the physical capital. Capital meaning physical capital in terms of, just for lack of a better example, robots and automation equipment within a factory itself. All those things that go into the factory, including the factory itself, that would be considered that physical capital. And physical capital, of course, is owned by the household, the people, in terms of what? Drilling down on that physical capital down to the financial capital, that would be the ownership of the firm itself, if you will. Ownership of that capital within that structure, within that physical structure itself. The owners, the root owners, if you will, of that physical capital. Ownership in terms of equity ownership, which is the shareholders, stockholders of a company, or the debt owners, the bondholders of the company. And I'm not going to go any deeper than that at the moment, but just suffice to say that capital is again owned by the household. The household is the one that provides that capital. They're the owners of that capital. Next is entrepreneurship. The entrepreneur is from the household going to the firm. They're the ones that run the firm. They are the decision makers at the firm. So whether we're talking about a single proprietor, a single small business, single owner operator, small business. So in that case, we'll be wearing two hats. One would be as the decision maker, and the other would be the labor that they're providing for the firm in terms of any wages or salaries that result from, they're in, I should say. Anyhow, that's the entrepreneur. So whether we're talking about the entrepreneur at a small business, or the entrepreneur like an Elon Musk, or the list is endless. And going back a few years, I would always throw in Bill Gates, but he's kind of fallen by the wayside. Nonetheless, these are all entrepreneurs. They are the decision makers at their firms. And I say their firms. It could be, they may not own the firm. It could be the CEO of the firm, but they are the decision makers. They're at the very tip top of the organization, along with the other like COO, the chief operating officer, et cetera. So it could be, again, a single person enterprise, or a multi-billion, or in the case of like an Apple, a multi-trillion, I guess, if it's worth well over $1 trillion now, I believe, type of an operation. Those are the entrepreneurs, the decision makers. They're the ones that are deciding what? They're deciding what productive resources are going to be employed, how much labor, how much capital, how much entrepreneurship for that matter, and also the land, which we'll be getting into in a moment. And they also do what? They decide what is actually being produced at the firm, the quantities and so on and so forth. So they have the, I dare I say, the most important role in this circular flow really kind of falls on the shoulder of the entrepreneur. They're the decision makers, right? If they make the wrong decisions, or they repeatedly make the wrong decisions, they are ousted, right? I was going to say outed, but they're ousted. They're removed from their position, because it's one of those, it's a story of either you succeed or you fail, and if you fail, you're gone. And it's as simple as that, because we, again, as the owners of that physical capital, as stockholders, shareholders in a company, we are not going to suffer a CEO, for example, that is not providing us with adequate profits. All these are interrelated. You'll see this as we go, but this is just talking through at the moment. So just try to kind of get your head wrapped around that. The last part of this productive resource is land. Land is pretty straightforward. It's the land upon which we walk. It's the land upon which we grow crops. It's the land upon which we drive our vehicles, what have you. Anyway, this is, I shouldn't say the land upon which we drive our vehicles, but you get the idea. That's the land that's out there. And land, of course, the payment for that land, the income derived from that land for the use of our land is what we call rent, which is, of course, it's kind of a loaded term in economics because there are lots of different types of rent, and we won't go there, but nonetheless, you kind of get the idea. These are the productive resources. And when we're looking at our circular flow, again, we're going from the household to the firm. And the inner portion of this, the inner ring, if you will, it goes from the household in the form of the input mix or the productive resource mix. There's the factor markets, all these different names for the same darn thing, right? This is what the productive resources that are flowing from the household to the firm. The labor, entrepreneurship, capital, and land. I like to keep the people up front, labor and entrepreneurs, and then capital and land. But at any rate, this is flowing through the input mix into the firm. At the firm, the decision maker, the entrepreneur, is making those decisions as to, well, how much of those different inputs, different factors of production are there going to be employed at the firm. Got it. So moving on from there, continuing that, closing the loop, if you will, the inner loop from the firm to the household. Those are the goods that are being produced, the goods and services, or the output mix, and what is being consumed, if you will, by the household. These are all the goods that are being demanded from the firm by the household, being pulled back again through the firm into the household. So this is the output mix. So that closes the inner ring. So next thing we're talking about is income. And this is something I've kind of been talking a little bit about it. You get the idea. Income is on the bottom part of this of the circular flow, flowing back from the firm to the household for, yes, guess what? Payment for the use of those productive resources. So income in economics is a very, very explicit expression, meaning that income is received for the use of those productive resources, the current use of those productive resources, if I may be more specific, meaning such things as like Social Security, etc. Those don't really count as income because you're not receiving them for the use of your current productive resources. You're receiving those benefits for what? The use of your previous, historical productive resources, the taxes that you paid for those. Anyways, we won't go there. Income flowing back to the household, that is called the income distribution, which is another aspect of economics that you could get into great detail going through that. So what you'll notice on this lower outer ring, this income flowing back to the household from the firm, is that you see the arrows that are going off, including taxes and saving, and the transfer payments which are flowing back in. That would include such things as Social Security, etc. At any rate, so taxes are taken away from that income. So what happens with your income? It's very straightforward, but it's something that you know, but it's something that you never have formally probably heard or formally actually thought about it yourself. And that is that income is divided into three categories. First, you have to pay your taxes, right? The next is the consumption. That's consumer spending. Those are the expenditures. That's that portion going from the firm to the household, where the household is buying that output or those goods and services from the firm. And the residual, whatever is left over, is called saving. So again, there's no S on the end of saving in economics. Why, I couldn't tell you. I'm sure there's a good reason, but I don't know what it is. So again, these are all what are called withdrawals, and we'll get into that as we kind of go through. So again, just kind of keep that in mind. So another word that I'm going, or expression that I'm going to throw out there at you. So again, that's income. Income goes to three places: taxes, consumption, whatever's left over, the residual goes to savings. There's a Latin term called ceteris paribus, or maybe it's ceteris paribus or something. Anyways, I've always heard ceteris paribus, so I'll stick with that, okay? And that means holding all else constant. It's kind of like in physics, if you're holding gravity constant, there's something, I'm oversimplifying it perhaps, but you get the idea. So anyways, that's ceteris paribus, and this is our circular flow, the inner ring and the outer ring going down. And the top part of this ring, flowing back again from the household, rolling back around to the firm, what you'll notice is this is actually on the top portion. So you'll notice that there are taxes on the bottom. Those are like withholding taxes, payroll taxes, etc., that are being taken out of your income at the household. But there are also other taxes. Other taxes would include such things as sales taxes, property taxes that are paid with your income. This is after you've received your income. You're paying these taxes. Those are taxes, and it reduces your ability to do what? To consume is really what it comes down to. And you'll also notice that imports on the left again as well, those are leaving the economy, and there's a specific reason for it, and I might as well say it right now. So imports and exports, we'll be talking about this more as we go forward. Imports are considered a withdrawal, taken away from the economy, causing the economy to shrink or implode, if you will. Likewise, taxes and saving, because if it's taxed away, you can't spend it, right? You can't consume. Or if you plunk it into saving, you're not spending it. So this is on its face. These are, I know that the taxes go somewhere. They feed the government programs, et cetera, and saving off, also goes to work in terms of being a financial being in terms of being a financial capital going to work for you, but leave that alone. And on its face, then these are withdrawals taken away from the economy. Imports are also taking away from the economy, because if you think about it, so imports and exports. Imports, where are the imports produced? They're produced outside of the country. And what do? We purchase those imports, and where does that money go? Outside of the country, in order to what? To pay for the use of someone else's productive resources. So that's why it's considered a withdrawal, where it takes away or causes the economy to shrink, reduces economic activity, because it does not stay within that domestic economy, as opposed to exports. Exports, where are they produced? Here. And from that, the firm is doing what? Paying for the use of those productive resources in the form of income, in the form of wages and salaries and profit, and in terms of rent and so on and so forth, flows back through. And so there are benefits, and there's good and bad about both, right? Imports are great because they help increase competition. But they harm us in terms of the monies flowing out and the use of some other country's productive resources, blah, blah, blah. And conversely, on the export side, they're great because we get the income in. We're using our productive resources. The downside is that someone else gets to use those goods and services that are produced. At any rate, again, withdrawals and leakages. And the other part, on the right-hand side, we're looking specifically at, on the left-hand side, those are the withdrawals, the taxes and imports. And on the right-hand side are the injections. The injections would include such things as investments, or gross private domestic investment, meaning the infusion of that physical capital at the firm, right? This is all that investment in terms of those, again, what goes into that firm. Next would be government expenditures, and government expenditures are considered an injection or causing the economy to explode or to expand or however you want to refer to it. I always found it funny in economics we say explode or implode, but anyway, causing the economy to grow. How about that? So government expenditures, yes, they are helpful because what do people do with their money? What do people like me as a professor being paid through the college that which I'm working, etc. I'm being paid with funds primarily, if you will, from the government. So these are government expenditures going toward my salary, etc. And what do I do with my salary? What do I do with my income? Like everybody else, pay taxes, buy things, consume, and hopefully there's some left over for saving. At any rate, that's government expenditures. That's why it's considered an injection or causing the economy to grow. Finally, again, as I mentioned before about exports because they're injections, because they're adding to the economy. They're adding income into the economy. The goods that they're producing are leaving the country or the services are leaving the country, but nonetheless, they are being produced here. Okay, that kind of closes the loop on it. I went a little further than I wanted to, but that's okay. Okay, so now, backing up a little bit, and again, we still refer to the circular flow with this, or we can, but looking at the two different types of approaches on economics. To start with, microeconomics used to just be called economics or economics, and that was it. Macroeconomics kind of came about after, we'll say 1940 or so it's been around a while, of course, but the idea was that this was actually applied economics, really, is what it came down to. And that means something else today, but that's basically what macroeconomics was all about, applying all of these economic principles, these principles from the microeconomic side. Anyway, so looking back again at our circular flow, which you don't have in front of you, but the output mix, that is what's being produced, how those products, those goods and services are being produced, are done through the input mix, meaning how much labor is going to be employed, how much physical capital is going to be employed. Entrepreneurs, is it something where you need some really heavy-duty entrepreneurship, guiding the ship, or is it something where maybe you don't need as strong of a leader to do this? Anyhow, that's all part of that input mix. And lastly, of course, would be land. That's all included in the input mix, how those goods and services are being produced for the output mix. The income distribution is who receives the goodies, who receives the income associated with the production at the firm, how much labor is being employed, how much labor is being compensated. That's the income distribution. And I'll throw Y in here, and that's just because I wanted to add trade. So Y being the reason for trade, meaning again that trade, whether we're talking about international or domestic, it's all based upon something that's called comparative advantage. So comparative advantage means that, okay, I've got here's an example, I've got a push lawnmower, not gas or electric powered, an actual push lawnmower. I don't, but we'll just say I do. And I've got a 2-acre parcel of land to cut. It might take me 4 or 5 days if I don't kill myself in the process, as opposed to my neighbor who has a nice riding lawnmower that could cut that 2 acres in less than an hour, for example. I'm probably exaggerating, but you get the idea. That's where comparative advantage comes in. Someone has an advantage over another. And there could also be something that's called absolute advantage. We won't go there at this point, but this is the basis. Comparative advantage, this is the basis for trade. This is why we trade, because both sides have to kind of benefit from that. It's really what it comes down to. One country might have lower cost in terms of their productive resource mix, or it could be some other rationale behind that trade, one versus another, but we'll talk more of that as we kind of go through the course. Opportunity cost, these again are expressions, ceteris paribus, comparative advantage, absolute advantage. Opportunity cost is what you surrender or forego, your next best competitive option. So example of that is that, and this is a pretty stark example, but we'll just say a major league baseball player earning, dare I say, someone's earning $140 million plus a year. I forget. Japanese phenomenon playing for the LA Dodgers at the moment. Who knows? It could change at any time. Where he is a phenomenal starting pitcher, and he's also like a Babe Ruth type of a home run hitter. Tremendous power. Earning $150 million a year probably at this point. But if you took that kid, and I'm assuming he's a kid, he's probably 25 years of age. I don't know. Maybe he has a college degree. You compare that to his next best competitive advantage, $140 million versus we'll just be generous in a starting salary of maybe $75,000. In Japan, maybe $100,000. I don't know. We'll say $100,000 just to be generous about it. So the opportunity cost, this is where the image of that opportunity cost really comes into play, your next best competitive option. So his next best competitive option to this $140 million a year salary is maybe $100,000 a year as an engineer or an accountant or something along those lines, okay? Again, being very generous. That's opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is something, and we'll be getting into this a bit in this class. It's more of a micro topic, but as we're under micro, so you get the idea. Anyways, that's opportunity cost as opposed to trade-off. Trade-off is you have one option versus another, and you kind of am I going to buy am I going to buy the Coke brand product or the store brand product? That's a trade-off. If you buy the Coke brand product, you might only be able to buy one can versus the other. You might be able to buy two cans. That's the trade-off that we deal with all the time. So they're similar in many ways, but there is a difference between trade-offs and opportunity cost. Opportunity cost measures that trade-off, if you will, and the trade-off is what we do, what we actually step out and do. Anyway, comparative advantage. Example, very quickly, already talked about my lawn mowing experience. Another would be like a lawyer versus paralegal. So you have a person who's a paralegal, they're the best paralegal. Those are the people that do all the legwork, the grunt work for attorneys, do all the research, do a lot of the writing. They're just absolutely, many of them are astonishing. I've seen some that are just absolutely amazing. They're probably much more competent than the lawyers that they're working for, but I won't go there. The idea is that you have a paralegal who's the best paralegal in the area, and maybe they're making, I have no idea, top notch. Again, I'm going to put a number on there that's probably wrong, but let's just say $100 an hour or $75 an hour. Better be it to err on the safe side, right? So they're a paralegal and they decide they want to become a lawyer, so they become a lawyer. They pass the bar. They go through night school and so on and so forth, and so they are a freshly minted lawyer. They don't feel very competent as a lawyer. They're probably an average lawyer at this point, at the very least, starting out. Nonetheless, this average lawyer is going to be making significantly more than the best paralegal. So if you are this paralegal, that's a recently minted lawyer, you would rather be doing the paralegal because you feel more comfortable there, but you would obviously opt for the lawyer because A, you've invested so much, but B, you're going to be paid significantly more for being a lawyer. That's comparative advantage in a nutshell, okay? Anyway, onward to macroeconomics, three-legged stool. Employment, we're looking at employment, we're looking at economic growth, GDP, gross domestic product, and finally price level changes, or what we're more typically used to seeing is inflation, right? So we're looking at those three: employment, economic growth, GDP, gross domestic product, and unemployment, if you will, or the employment side of things. So for December 2023, we were at 3.7 national U3 unemployment rate, and the U3 unemployment rate is derived from, I won't get too technical, but suffice to say, those folks that are unemployed, that's the numerator on top, divided by the labor force, so that the labor force would be equal to the employed plus the unemployed. So that is the denominator. And To be counted as U3 unemployed means that you have to be, one, not working, so you're unemployed, right? Not working, but actively seeking employment. So you can see where there might be a problem, hopefully, in that there are some people that are not actively seeking employment, whether it's because they don't feel they have to, not judging, just, stating the facts is that they might be not interested in working, or they can't find a job. There's a lot of that too, and they've kind of given up on looking for jobs. So they've relegated themselves to doing other things than actually being employed. So that's where there's a hole in this, and that it's lower than really what it ought to be. I'll just leave it at that. So we're at 3.7%. In December, Michigan was at 4.3%, a bit higher, obviously. In November 2023, we're about a month behind typically when we look at state numbers versus the national numbers. Changes from last year, the unemployment rate actually went up from December 2022 from 3.5 up to 3.7 in December 2023. But Michigan's actually went down a touch from 4.4% in November 2022 to 4.3% November 2023. Is this unemployment rate misleading? Yes, we've already talked about that. It's not picking up everybody that's out there. It's only picking up those people that are not employed. That's fine. But it's also, you have to be counted. You have to be actively seeking employment. Okay, so quickly moving on. This is the alternative measures of labor underutilization. So this is not unemployment per se. This is underemployed, et cetera, if you will. And what you'll notice is that there are lots of different categories, including our U3, right? So that, again, this is explicitly looking at how things are broken out. So if you go drill all the way down to that U6 unemployment, it is significantly higher than our current unemployment rate, because that picks up whom? Picks up those people that are kind of marginally employed, meaning that you're working part-time, but you would prefer to be working full-time, and a number of other factors. And so it ends up pushing this up. And in my view, and most people's view, frankly, this is probably a bit more accurate, looking at it in terms of the U6 unemployment rate. And, having said that, again, the U6 unemployment rate doesn't capture everything, because there could still be people on the sidelines that are really not going, they won't go back to work. Not that they can't go back to work, not that they're disabled in some way, shape, or form, but they are really sticking to the sidelines, if you will, staying out of the workforce, staying out of the labor force. And again, when we talk about labor force is equal to the people that are unemployed, plus those that are employed. So people that are on the boat trying to get a job, and the people, those are the unemployed, the U3 unemployed, and the people that are at the oars, pulling on the oars, those are the people that are employed. Put them all together, and we have what's called a labor force, okay? Anyway. So every month what happens is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's a subset, if you will, it's a bureau under the Department of Labor. They issue employment reports. And I like to go through this on a monthly basis. It's typically published on the first Friday of the month, depending upon if there's a holiday and, et cetera. It's typically the case. So the numbers are always kind of weird at this time of the year, because they're trying to reconcile different things and trying to incorporate, fold changes in from before, trying to get things lined up, right? It's kind of like an accounting exercise where you're saying, oh, I forgot to include that expense from July, so I'm going to include it in the December month-end close. It closes in, assuming that's your fiscal year ending, December of the year. Anyhow, I'll stop there with the accounting part, right? So again, starting from the top, civilian non-institutional population, I'll just read this. Those 16 years and older that are not counted in the military or other institutional settings, meaning, of course, that it's counting pretty much everybody over the age of 16. So it's discounting the youngsters under the age of 16. And it's discounting the military and other institutional settings like prison, nursing homes, etc., because they are captured by other counters that are out there. Because keep in mind that even though the Census Department is under the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is under the Department of Commerce, they do a lot of the legwork for most of these other institutions, including the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So they've got different bins for these other folks, the folks that are in the military and these other institutional settings. So what we derive from, again, I mentioned it before, the labor force, or the civilian labor force, okay, to be more explicit because we're not counting the military, that counts the people that are employed plus the people that are unemployed. The labor force participation rate, this is something I really focus on and have been for many, many years. What that does is it takes the employed plus the employed plus the unemployed divided by that CNP, or the civilian non-institutional population. So the utility of this is that you're trying to find out, again, the employed with the unemployed, that's the boat, people that are in the boat. The unemployed are the folks looking for an oar, and the employed are the ones pulling on the oars. So that's the percentage of the population that's actively, involved, if you will, in that workforce, in that labor force, trying to get, they are either employed or they are unemployed, trying to get access, right? So that's where we get our labor force participation rate, which, by the way, is extremely low. There are a lot of reasons for it, and most people kind of point the finger at retiring baby boomers, et cetera, but that doesn't capture the full story, but that's for another day. Anyhow, so looking at the month, the changes, the civilian and we have the employment population ratio. That's just simply looking at the employed divided again by that civilian non-institutional population. So we're just looking at the folks pulling on the oars, right? The unemployment rate, again, are the people in the boat that don't have an oar, divided by the entire population of the boat. The unemployed without the oars and the employed folks that are on the oars. So walking through, civilian non-institutional population rose by 170,000. Very common, very that's very ordinary. That's a typical number I'm trying to say. Labor force actually fell, by 676,000. Not a good sign. That dropped down our labor force participation rate from a low 62.8 down to an even lower 62.5%. Employed fell off the charts. Charts at 683,000, and that of course drove down the employment population ratio from 60.4% down to 60.1% in December 2023. Unemployed stayed pretty static, so that number didn't change. The folks at the oars jump ship is really what we're saying with the unemployed. So they're out of the labor force altogether. And then the unemployment rate, of course, didn't change at all because the unemployed number didn't change whatsoever. The leftover, if you will, is called what I could refer to the NLF, for the not in the labor force component. So we have the civilian non-institutional population is made up the labor force plus the not in the labor force. So these are the folks that are on the sidelines, and this number, in my estimation, of course it rose because of the aforementioned problems with the labor force, for example, rose by 845,000, going from 99,000 and some change up to over 100,000. And I'm sorry, not 100,000, 100 million, excuse me. So 99.7 million up to 100.5 million. So it increased dramatically, the numbers. And the problem with that is that I'm just going to say it that I think the number should be about 90 million not in the labor force. So we're looking at 10 million people that are, not in the labor force should be about 90 million. So we're looking at about 10 million people that are on the sidelines that ought not be. They should be in the boat. They should be either employed or they should be unemployed seeking employment. All right. Okay, so again, we're looking at in the top chart that we're looking at, the top table, I should say, looking at the breakout. This is again from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this is on a monthly basis. And they're showing the changes from month over month going forward through the year 2023, pretty much January through the end of December. And you can look at the annual changes between December 2022 and December 2023. So that's it for the labor side of things. So that covers employment. The next thing we're looking at is economic growth. All right. So economic growth. These are numbers that are the labor numbers are reported on a monthly basis. The economic growth, or GDP, gross domestic product. And gross domestic product is, again, the final value of all goods and services at market prices for a specified period of time. So basically everything that's sold in terms of goods and services for over a period of time. Again, they have to be the final value of all goods and services, meaning that again, without getting into too much detail, you take a vehicle, you buy a new vehicle, that vehicle includes tires that were added to the vehicle, an engine that was added to the vehicle, but we're looking not at those individual components, the build up to that vehicle, but the entire vehicle itself. All right, that's just a real quick glance at it. We'll talk more about this perhaps later on in the course. At any rate, we're looking at this GDP on a quarterly basis, and not a very good chart to look at, but the reality is that what we're looking at is that we're looking at the percentage change on a quarterly basis, but annualized. So, of course, we go back to 2020 during our run-in with COVID. You see some crazy, wild numbers, up, down 30%, back up 30%, 30+% for a given quarter when the economy was switched off and then switched back on, trying to catch up. So there's some aberrations in this, but nonetheless, typically, if it's positive, it's below, it's usually no more than 5%. And if it's below, it's no more than, again, 5% dropping below, it's a shrinking economy, if you will. So this is quarterly data. Again, here we're looking at quarterly data, and what I would recommend that you do is, just stop and look at these charts and at these tables, if you will, and just to kind of, I'm not going to bore you by going through each number that's on here, but again, the quarterly data that we just saw in the graph previous, and this one is now in tabular form. And then we also have the annual data in this tabular form, which is kind of interesting. I've got the year 2004, I think it's 2005. 2005. That I've got the arrow pointing toward. And if you take out COVID, the aberration with COVID, where we had a drop off, we had, in essence, we had a recession, but we won't go there typically. Well, we certainly had a recession of sorts that was driven by COVID, and then we had a bounce back where we had significantly higher economic growth than we normally have been. And when I say normal, setting aside COVID, the last time that we were over 3% growth was in 2005. Problem with that is that 3% growth rate is usually considered about normal, average, meaning, yeah, we should be able to grow significantly more than that, but that's kind of like the bar is low at 3%. We have not had 3% growth, aside from COVID, over the course of the last, we'll just say 20 years, right? We're into 2024, and I don't see us popping that 3.5% in 2024, but who knows? Maybe we will at the end of 2023. Point again is that we've had pretty anemic growth so far as our GDP is concerned, so far as that economic growth is concerned. Okay, so here again is a little better visual, I suppose. Looking at this, we're looking at our the growth rate, annual growth rate, and so on and so forth. It's just another way of looking at this. Again, I like to present things, and if I can, tabular form so you can see the numbers. And if not, if you can see them on the graph itself, that's fine too. But you get pretty much the idea. Is the kind of the anemic growth rate going back to the Great Recession, and moving forward up through the year 2020, 2021. Have to update this graph, but you get the idea. This is looking at this is a visualization of how the economy has been growing. We're considering price level changes, or in probably more common parlance would be inflation. We don't really think about it, but there's also deflation and another term called disinflation. At any rate, inflation, deflation, disinflation, we're talking about the change in price levels, okay? Again, inflation is that the price levels, of course, are rising from one period to the next. When we see it in percentage forms, there's an index you can use, or you can look at the change in that inflation from one period to the next, which direction it's moving. If it's going up, that's inflation. If it's going down, that can be either deflation or disinflation. The difference between the two is that deflation is that prices are actually dropping overall. Disinflation is that we still have inflation, but at a lower rate. So, example, you go from 2% inflation to 3% inflation, and in the next period you end up with a negative 1%. That would be deflation. And then in another instance, you're at 5% inflation and you drop down to 3% inflation. That is disinflation, or reduction in inflation. Anyway. First, we're looking. There are two sides to this. When we typically talk about inflation, or price level changes, rather, we have the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, and those are the ones that we're most concerned with. That is what we're paying for, the change in the price levels, if you will, of the goods and services that we're purchasing, that we're buying from the firm. So it's flowing from the firm back over to the household in the form of consumption, in terms of expenditures by the household, right? So last month, and from December 21 to 2022, I'd like to look back at 12-month period in order to kind of capture the change, the annual change in the price level. So anyway, December 21 through December 22, at 6.5% inflation on the CPI side, Consumer Price Index, for the 12-month period. And in December 2023, it was 3.4%. So it's gone down quite a bit. All right, it's pretty much cut in half, if you will, pretty close to it. Another metric is that we're looking at it in terms of taking out less food and energy. And the rationale behind this is food and energy prices tend to fluctuate quite a bit, as well we know. So they try to look at more the inflation in terms of like the overall look at inflation without all the changes that are driven by the ups and downs, if you will, of food and energy. Anyway, again, it was 5.7 December 2021 through December 2022. And this time around, it was at 3.9%. The difference, of course, is that it was actually a bit higher this time around than the overall CPI, which is interesting. But at any rate, these are things that we have a tendency to look at, and there are a lot of things that are going on at any given time. For example, we've seen a lot of inflation that's been kind of inspired by two things on the Consumer Price Index side. One was the demand for the goods and services that were available. And the other side of that was that the increased amount of income that we received, not income necessarily, but transfer payments in the form of stimulus checks and so on and so forth. And those are running out, so inflation is being tamped down somewhat naturally. In addition to that, the cost of energy has played a significant role in driving up this inflation. So anyhow, that is the CPI piece of it, and there are other interesting aspects of it, but that's the general gist of it, if you will. Okay, so again, looking at this presentation, this part of the presentation, we're looking at it graphically first on the left-hand side, just for the 1 month, and measuring it, with all items, and then the difference associated with taking food and energy out. And what you'll notice is that energy dropped significantly, which is that's really been a big driver behind a lot of this inflation. So we've seen significant dips in the price of energy. Energy includes what? Gas, oil, um, natural gas, the price of electricity, so on. It's all these other metrics, measurements that we have out there. All this folds into this energy pool, and it's gone down quite a bit for a variety of reasons. And not the least of which is the increased amount of production that we have in terms of crude oil, which has been very, very important. Anyhow, this is again that visual, if you will, that illustration. On the right-hand side is further illustrations. One is travel over, that inflation over a period of time, and what you'll notice is that yes, it was quite low. It's been quite low for quite some time. You see a couple of big dips. Part of it, the first one on the left, has to do with the Great Recession, fall off in demand, and it's driven prices down for the consumer. And the second one was it was a fall off again during COVID, and then boom, took off, spiking after COVID, and that was again in part to do with, or during COVID, I should say, in part to and after COVID. In part had to do with the lack of goods that were available, goods and services that were available because of COVID. Part of it also, again, had to do with the stimulus checks that were flowing out. And another aspect of it had to do with, again, energy. It's an interesting, I'd have to take a look at that a bit further. But anyhow, you get the idea. So this is the CPI, or Consumer Price Index, what the household as consumer, what they're paying for those goods and services coming from the producer, coming from the firm. This is the one that affects all of us most apparently, most readily, if you will. So onward we go. So again, this is kind of a neat picture of what kind of goes into that consumer price index, including food at home, and there are all kinds of different categories that roll into these numbers as they're rolled up, if you will. Anyhow, again, the gray bars are indicators of recession, right? And so that would have been, again, the most recent was COVID inspired, et cetera. But what you will notice is that we have not had these price increases, this amount of inflation, like we had going back again to 2021. Just absolutely took off like crazy. And the result of which is it had to be countered somehow, and we'll be talking about that kind of going forward. But these are all things that are of concern to us, right? This is the macroeconomy, if you will. Again, when we're talking about employment or unemployment, economic growth in the form of GDP, and price level changes, first here in the form of the CPI. And next, we are looking at the producer price index. So in the producer price index, this is what the producer or the firm is paying for those productive resources coming from the household. And similar to what we saw with the CPI, we saw a huge spike in prices for the producer. What's interesting about this is that there used to be pretty close linkage between the PPI and the CPI. So prices go up at the firm, they pass those prices on to the household in the form of higher prices, the household as consumer. Typical. That's kind of changed somewhat of late over the course, well, I say of late, for me that would be over the course of the last 20 years or so. But nevertheless, there is some tamping down by the PPI, which does in many cases translates into what the PPI is showing this month may present itself in the CPI kind of going forward, because frankly the CPI is those are the prices that are coming from the firm. And if the prices for the goods and services, if you will, that the firm is buying those productive resources, labor, entrepreneurship, capital, and land from the household, if those prices are going down, then those prices will be passed along. Not because the firms are just wonderful kind people. It's because of that good old competition drives those prices down. So we haven't quite seen it play out the way that we had hoped in recent months. It has been going down, but then it popped a little bit last month. The not the PPI, but the actual CPI went up a little bit month over month. At any rate, this is the PPI again. This is what the firms are paying for those productive resources coming from the household. Okay, so onward we go. Now we're looking at the debt. So when we talk about the debt and deficit, those are terms that you probably have heard. The distinction between the two is that, think about it this way. The debt is what we owe overall, that $34.1 trillion as of January 2024. Huge, huge numbers. The change from one period to the next is when we have deficit, stay the same, or surplus, basically. So basically, deficit or surplus. Deficit means that we're spending more than we're taking in, or a surplus means that we are taking in more than we're spending. So we have some left over. Think about it in terms of our income. Again, take away the taxes, because that's what this is driven by. This is at the federal level we're looking. So the income that the Fed gets, that the federal government gets in the form of tax revenues, minus the expenditures. And if it's a positive number, then it's a surplus. If it's a negative number, it is a deficit. So we're running deficits, no surprise. And this is what's driven us up to this 34.1 trillion. Going back 10, 11 years, I guess, January 2013, I guess that's actually 12. Anyhow, no, it's 11 years, but sorry. So 16.4 trillion, and it's more than doubled up to 34.1 trillion. What the heck, man, right? A lot of reasons behind it. Is it a reason to be concerned? Yes, absolutely. Why is that? The biggest reason is that when it comes down to it, that we have to pay. It's not that we're going to pay this debt off. It's going to continue to rise, and for a variety of reasons. But we have to what? We have to service the debt. We have to pay the interest on that debt, and that's going to pose problems. And we'll talk more about that. Okay, so again, when I mentioned about the, paying the interest on the debt, this is a problem that we're encountering right now as we speak. So the annual payment of the interest on the debt. Remember now, this is when we pay the interest on the debt. This is a line item in the federal budget. So this is something that we have to do every year. We have to, we're paying this money out of our current budget. So this has to be funded either through the taxpayers in total or further deficits, increasing more deficits, borrowing more money in order to help pay for that debt, pay for that, that interest on the debt. So in this case, again, we're looking back to the year 2021, and these are the fiscal years that run again from October 1 through September 30 of the following year. So the 2021 fiscal year would go from October 2020 through September 30th, 2021, and 2022 would be starting in October 1, 2021, going through September 30th, 2022, and that went up to 710 billion. And in 2023, we will be at $1 trillion, or darn near $1 trillion. And that number is likely to continue to rise going forward. And there are reasons for it, but won't really touch upon it at the moment. But keep in mind, when we talk about the average maturity on the debt, that means that when the debt has to be redone, meaning you've got to go out and, let's just say you're buying a car and you get a 3-year, 36-month, you have a 3-year, 36-month note on the car, but the reality is it's only on half of the car. So you've got to go back out after it covers half the payments of the car. After that 36 months, you have to get another loan in order to take care of that loan going forward. And that's basically what we're talking about, except that this is ongoing, meaning this debt, we already realized the debt is not going to go away. It's going to continue to rise. So we have to figure out some way to do what? To finance the debt going forward. Okay? Okay, so the biggest driver behind this move, this higher interest rates, as we're looking at on the debt, the weighted average maturity and the weighted average interest on that debt, if you will. It's moved from 2.7, actually, we'll go back to 2022. It was at 1.5%. July 2023, it had moved up to 2.7%. And now in December, it's 3.11%. This is all driven by what? Higher interest rates out there in the markets. Because what happens is that when the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury, remember, U.S. Treasury, they're the keeper of the coin, right? They're the keeper of all of our money. Guess how much money that the U.S. Treasury has? You guessed it, negative 34.1 or $2.2 trillion at this point. Now, don't worry, that number is going to go up. So all they're doing is tracking this, our loan, if you will, or the lending that's going on, the borrowing, I should say, rather. So again, that is going up, and the reason it's going up is because the interest rates are going up in general, as we know, and that's driven by monetary policy from the Federal Reserve. We won't talk about that now, but that's kind of at the root of this that's driving these interest rates up to our detriment as taxpayers, because we're the ones that have to foot this bill. This has to be funded through our budgets, our annual budgets, if you will, Again, the duration or how long it has to be until we roll over or paid off our debt. And again, we're never going to pay this off. So our overall, our overall marketable debt that's out there, that $34.1 trillion, we'll just say not all of it's marketable, but point is that $34.1 trillion, that has a shelf life of 74 months, okay? So we're talking about 6 years and 2 months, right? So 6 years and 2 months, all that debt will be rolled over, that $34.1 trillion. And again, the unfortunate part of this is that we are going to, one, add more to this debt, this overall debt, so it's going to go from 34.1 trillion up to a higher number anyway. And in addition to that, the interest rates are higher than they were. So if that means that the payment of interest on that debt is also going to do what? Go up higher, 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 higher. And that is something that is it's absolute catastrophe, a disaster for us as a nation, right? Anyway, these are all things to kind of keep in mind. And yes, they call economics the dismal science, and it's for a reason, because a lot of this stuff is not good news. It's not pleasant to hear. It's not pleasant to even scratching the surface understand. It's very difficult to swallow some of these things, but this is the reality that we have. Better to know this stuff. Better to know you're better off knowing this stuff than not. I'll leave it at that. I know it doesn't feel that way, but at least you won't have to wonder about it. You will understand a bit of this stuff again going forward. Okay, so again, this is just another image of that weighted average maturity. And yes, we've had, it's good actually that we have this long of a maturity, because that means that a good portion of our debt is not going to re-up at higher levels, that as high as interest rates are right now, fortunately. But the unfortunate side is that a good portion of our debt is rolling over forthwith, as in within this next year going forward. And again, lucky us, in this case, we're talking about 31% of our debt having to be refinanced in 2024. And I don't know if this is the annual year, as in January through December 2024, or October 1 through September 30, 2024. In any event, this is a painful pill to swallow, because it's 31% or $7.6 trillion will mature over the next year, meaning that since we're not going to pay it off, that $7.6 trillion, we are going to have to do what? We're going to have to borrow. Again, we are going to have to borrow at higher and higher rates. So here's the question I'll leave you with, and that is this a problem? Is there a problem here? And this is something, again, that we'll be talking about kind of going forward in the class. But clearly, this is an issue. This is a problem. How do we solve it? Simple math problem, really, right? But the question is, or I should say, the difficulties come down into actually taking our medicine, meaning to cut back on our spending, perhaps. B, further taking our medicine by raising taxes to pay down this debt, or to at least offset the deficits to keep us out of deficit territory. So there are a lot of options out here. There are a lot of things to consider. Just keep that in mind as we go forward in the class.